In a shocking turn of events, a routine traffic stop escalates into a nightmare for one man as a racist police officer targets him, only to uncover a shocking twist. It all starts when a black man is pulled over by an officer who makes assumptions based solely on his race. With tensions rising, the officer's aggressive approach leads to an arrest, but this is no ordinary arrest. As the situation unfolds, the man remains calm, refusing to escalate the situation, an act that would later reveal just how wrong the officer was. What the officer doesn't know is that this man isn't just any random citizen. In a surprising twist, he's actually an FBI agent undercover on a covert mission. As the truth comes to light, the officer's world begins to crumble, but it's not just about him. The story dives deep into the layers of racial profiling, systemic injustice, and how assumptions can lead to dangerous consequences. What happens next? Will the officer face consequences for his actions, or will the system protect him? Stay tuned as we unravel the shocking truth behind this unforgettable encounter. The man, who had been minding his own business, knew something wasn't right the moment the officer approached his car. The officer, a middle-aged white man with a hardened look, wasn't exactly polite. His tone was sharp, and his eyes scanned the driver in a way that felt uncomfortable, even hostile. The man had been through this kind of thing before. He had dealt with the stares, the racial profiling, the assumption that he was a threat just because of the color of his skin. But he didn't let it show. He stayed calm, collected, knowing that any wrong move could escalate the situation further. The officer, however, seemed to be looking for a reason to act. He asked unnecessary questions about where the man was headed, his destination, and even made assumptions about his intentions. He was quick to pull the man out of the car, slapping handcuffs on him without a clear reason. It was all happening so fast that the man barely had a moment to process, but in his mind, he knew he had to keep it together. What the officer didn't know was that the man's calm demeanor wasn't a sign of fear. It was a sign of control. The man wasn't just a civilian. He wasn't just some random guy in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was an FBI agent on a deep cover operation, someone who had spent years earning trust in communities, working undercover, and getting to know how these systems operated from the inside. As the officer's actions grew more erratic, the man couldn't help but feel a wave of frustration. He had been in the field long enough to know how dangerous moments like these could get, especially when the person who's supposed to serve and protect is the one causing harm. Was the officer just acting on personal bias, or was there something deeper at play here? The man knew he needed to stay focused if he had any hope of clearing this up. But the questions were already starting to build. Would the truth even matter in this moment, or was the damage already done? The officer's grip tightened around the man's wrists, the cold metal of the handcuffs biting into his skin. As he was shoved against the car, the man could feel the officer's breath on his neck, hear the harshness in his voice as he barked commands, demanding to know why he was acting so suspicious. The tension in the air was thick, and the man could sense the officer's deep-seated prejudice, the assumption that anyone who looked like him was guilty of something. It was a feeling he knew all too well, a feeling that no matter how peaceful he tried to be, how compliant he remained, he was always seen as a threat. But even as the officer continued his tirade, the man stayed composed, his training kicking in. He wasn't just any citizen. He had lived his life under a false identity, built relationships with people who trusted him, and infiltrated networks where his safety had always been at risk. He was an agent, part of something much larger, with access to sensitive information that could change everything if the wrong people got their hands on it. He was the quiet observer, the person who blended in, never the one who stood out. And right now, he was fighting to keep that balance intact, knowing that the officer's overstep could jeopardize everything. From the officer's perspective, though, the situation was clear-cut. He had stopped a black man in a supposedly bad neighborhood, and everything about him screamed out of place. The officer's mind was clouded by racial bias, by the years of ingrained stereotypes that told him to fear the man, to treat him with suspicion. He didn't know that the man he had arrested was someone who had seen and experienced far more than he ever would, someone who had been trained to handle high-pressure situations. In the officer's eyes, it wasn't about a misunderstanding, it was about control. Meanwhile, in the background, the officer's partner was starting to feel uneasy. They had been on plenty of calls together, but something about this situation felt wrong. He couldn't put his finger on it, but the way the man remained calm and nonchalant, despite everything going on, didn't match the usual reactions he was used to seeing. A small voice inside him began to wonder if they had made a mistake. But it was too late to backtrack now. The cuffs were on, the man was in custody, and the officer's ego was too tied up in proving he was right. As the scene unfolded, the tension only grew. The question wasn't just whether the man was guilty or innocent, it was whether he would even get a fair shot at proving his side of the story. Back at the station, the clock was ticking. Calls were being made, the higher-ups were starting to get involved, and the whispers of something bigger began to surface. Was this just a simple case of racial profiling, or was there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? One thing was for sure. This arrest was about to ripple out in ways no one had anticipated, and the truth was far more complicated than anyone could have imagined. The minutes dragged on like hours. In the cramped holding cell, the man sat in silence, his back against the cold metal wall. You could hear the voices outside, shouts, footsteps, the clattering of keys, but none of it mattered. He was thinking, calculating. Every move he made, every word he spoke, every gesture could set off a chain reaction. He knew that his identity would eventually be uncovered, but that didn't mean the damage wasn't already done. The officer's aggression, his unchecked assumptions, had sparked something deeper than a mere misunderstanding. It had highlighted a systemic issue that ran far beyond this single encounter. The officer was still in the interrogation room, pacing, his anger boiling. His partner had gone silent, sensing something wasn't right but too afraid to speak up. The officer's frustration was mounting. He had done everything by the book, he thought, so why wasn't anyone supporting him? Why wasn't the situation as clear as it should have been? Meanwhile, the station buzzed with activity. Officers were speaking in hushed tones, their whispers carrying the weight of uncertainty. The higher-ups had started to ask questions, and suddenly, everyone was on edge. The arrest had made waves beyond the department, attracting attention from people higher up the chain. Was it just a routine arrest gone wrong, or was there something far more significant at play? There were murmurs about the man's background, hints that he wasn't just a random guy caught in a bad situation. Some officers were starting to piece things together. Was he really an FBI agent? Was this whole thing some kind of setup? The question echoed through the air, growing louder and more dangerous with every passing second. The officer's mind raced as he paced in the interrogation room. He couldn't shake the thought that something was off, that his gut feeling was telling him more than his training ever had. But what could he do now? He had already made the arrest. The higher-ups wouldn't let him back out of this. They needed an explanation, a reason why the man was treated the way he had been. They needed a story, a justification. And then, just as the officer was about to take action, a phone call came through, the call that would change everything. It was from someone in the FBI. The man's cover had been blown. The officer's hand trembled as he picked up the phone, the weight of the situation crushing down on him. He could feel the room grow colder, the reality of what he had done sinking in. But the call didn't bring clarity, it only brought more confusion. The voice on the other end spoke in calm, measured tones, but the tension was unmistakable. "We need to speak to the man. Immediately. You don't understand what you've done." The words hung in the air, thick with meaning, leaving the officer frozen, unsure of what to do next. The clock continued ticking. With every passing moment, the stakes grew higher. The officer's life, his career, and the man's safety were all about to collide in a way no one could have predicted. Would the truth come to light in time? Would the officer's actions be exposed for what they truly were? Or was it already too late to undo the damage that had been done? The story was far from over, and the answers were just beginning to unfold. As the officer stood there, phone in hand, his mind raced. The calm voice on the other end of the line had said the words that sent a cold chill down his spine. *Q, don't understand what you've done. But the shock didn't end there. Before he could respond, the voice continued, each word more urgent than the last. The man you've arrested is a key player in an ongoing operation. He's not just any agent. He's been infiltrating a network we've been tracking for months. Your arrest, your actions have just jeopardized everything. The officer's blood ran cold. He had thought it was just a simple arrest, just another routine stop. But now, the magnitude of what he had done began to settle in. He wasn't dealing with just a case of racial profiling anymore. He was tangled up in something much larger, something dangerous. The FBI didn't make those kinds of statements unless things were seriously wrong. Before he could fully process the gravity of the situation, the door to the interrogation room slammed open. His partner entered, looking frazzled, carrying a file in his hand. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice tight. "They've pulled all the records on the man, his ID, his background, everything. And it's not matching up with anything we've got on file." His partner handed the file over, and the officer flipped through the pages, his heart sinking as he saw the man's real identity for the first time. This was no ordinary FBI agent. The man in the holding cell had connections, power, and access to information far beyond anything the officer had ever imagined. He wasn't just part of some operation. He was embedded deep within a network of criminal organizations that were intertwined with forces far beyond the local precinct's reach. Suddenly, everything clicked. The calmness, the professionalism, the way he had refused to panic under pressure. He wasn't just surviving this situation. He was playing it out as part of a bigger plan. The officer's mind raced. He had thought the stakes were high before, but now the game had changed. He wasn't just facing an internal investigation. He was caught in the crossfire of a covert operation that could bring down everything from the highest levels of law enforcement to criminal syndicates that spanned the globe. Outside, the station was on high alert. The pressure was mounting, and no one could shake the feeling that they were in way over their heads. Word was already starting to leak out, and whispers of the arrest were reaching people in positions of power. The more they dug into the man's real identity, the more it became clear. The situation was spiraling out of control. The officer felt the walls closing in. He was trapped between two worlds now, one where he had crossed lines he never should have, and another where he had unknowingly set in motion a chain of events that could bring down powerful people. As the minutes ticked by, he knew the FBI was closing in, but so were those who would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. This wasn't just about racial profiling anymore, it was about survival. And it was clear that no one, not even the officer, could predict how this would all unfold. The tension in the air was suffocating as the officer's mind swirled with uncertainty. His phone buzzed again, and he hesitated before answering, already dreading what more bad news might come. "You need to let him go, now," the voice on the other end instructed. It was the same calm voice from the FBI, but this time it carried a sense of finality, a command he couldn't ignore. The man in the holding cell was no ordinary agent, and there were powers beyond his station that were now making demands. The officer's hands shook as he glanced at his partner, who was pacing back and forth in the interrogation room. "They're calling in every favor. It's over," his partner muttered. "We've gone too far." The officer's heart hammered in his chest. The walls felt like they were closing in. He had no choice now. He had to release the man, but he knew this wasn't over. It had just started. The FBI was already sending a team to the station, and the minute the man walked out of that cell, everything would unravel. The officer was no longer the one in control. The game had changed, and he was simply a pawn in something much larger. With shaking hands, he walked down the corridor toward the holding cell. The man was still sitting calmly, his expression unreadable. There was a subtle shift in the air,